Thus, a decision of that commander-in-chief had been aroused, and Grancey decided to storm the fortress. And, as it had been anticipated by gendarmes, the marshal did not like to attack on his own. Instead, he insisted on being monitored by an experienced soldatesque executive. However, his officer on guard, that man was no longer of any use. He had himself bedded conveniently in a neighboring boutique, was snoring loudly, and left the impression of having eliminated himself. That is to say, he left the actor's scene for good, even when being shaken and or jiggled heavily by his master. Thus came the moment that Grancey got fully aware of the necessity of his old warrior companion gendarme, who indeed and immediately took on to the helmet, respectively dressed himself into the prestigious uniform habit of the sleepy guard, and both men got ready to act and to proceed together. But, nevertheless, at the doorsteps of that sad celebacy chamber, the marching season of both warriors got to an hold again. It turned out and happened to be the marshal himself who had to enter the chamber all alone, because the recently and newly appointed guard refused to enter the room, on the grounds that a marshal of France should properly not be served by a guard wearing incorrect uniforms. Thus, gendarme insisted and preferred to stay in the foyer, enjoying the wine and pretending to be on alert, it is, on a standby in case of emergency and if necessary. Thus it happened to be the marshal himself, as a single, who had to enter into the insidious chamber completely alone. The local players there were surprised and, as Bussy-Rabutin puts it, almost extrêmement, which means their moods had been inspired and expired into and onto all their extremities already. The she who had been disturbed most by the unexpected entrance was Madame de Mesnil. It is the so-called shabby rest, which indeed presented herself to a viewer in a mode which could no longer suffice to the claims of an amant like the marshal had been. The Thorks, in every respect the most remarkable among the nobles who participated in this configuration, were the first to gain his wording again and try to meliorate all matters seeable so far. In order to rescue the lady's honor carefully, he claimed that they had, drunken as they had been, developed into debaucheries among men, having caught the Mesnil only later on. She had defended herself, but got into weakness, since they neither had feeded her nor gave her any drinks, misachievements which all had resulted towards her fainting and sweaty outlook, which one could now observe at looking onto her face and other habits. At least Thorks praised his explanation for getting as close to the truth as one could possibly be able to come. The marshal saw no other possibility than to swallow that nicely donated bite, even whereas a severe choking occurred on his part, and that's why, in his uprising anger, he once again tried to wreak out on gendarme, whom he thought standing directly behind him, whereas gendarme, as mentioned already, had held back for the whole time. Instead of the gendarme, the marshal met an innocent lackey who was about to serve a new meal which had been ordered before. That wonderful ragout fell to the ground, and now it was the marshal who had to apologize. But the men were generous. They said there was still plenty of stew. They invited the Lord Marshal warmly, encouraging him to participate in that meal. From now on, laughing returned to the apartment. The horse took the marshal brotherly in his arms. They swapped, as drunken as the horse was, a few innocent kisses among relatives, and they assured themselves their mutual appreciation. Finally, the fat marshal was obliged to sit down on the couch, the Mesnil between him and Sorgs, and thus, in anticipating the whole story, the marshal emerged into the same trap inside which his officer guard had been expired so deadly before. The only one who, as Bussy-Rabutin was aptly wording it, was overwhelmed by a large melancholy was Madame Mesnil. She, allegedly still sober, had enjoyed plenty of everything, to an extent that one must concede that the drunken horse, at least objectively, was not quite telling the truth, maybe and perhaps inadvertently, because she was just that shabby rest from which the Sable had warned already before. In any case, all stood her up at the throat, and so it came that she made no killer pit out of her throat nor from her heart, and such prolonged convulsions of wine causes her sinking her head from time to time onto the shoulders of her both neighbors. Everyone tried to comfort her, inviting her to continue her eatings and drinkings in order to forget her sorrows, but she insisted that she only would love that one which she saw spreading around her, and she felt particularly saddened and complained against the fact that the marshal sitting next to her had not communicated one single word to her. Thus, by help of a newly arising eloquence, she tried to pursue the views which had been laid out by the horse before. She continued to defend her virtue, and wailed out loudly about the humiliation and violence that thus playing the innocent, which appealed into a burst of laughter to her companions, since everybody well remembered still how much that child had previously begged for standing ovations, and how submissive those wishes had been fulfilled by all of them. The marshal himself was no more responsive. He deluged in silence due to the fact that he got to the taste. Following the advice of his kinsman, gendarme, his thoughts were centered on his enormous belly, and grumbling he ordered towards Lamoyant Mesnil, whom he felt to be increasingly annoying, to enjoy the fantastic meal together with him. What then caused further reactions of the kind described before, though much more violent at once. Then, after stilling his first physical hunger, the marshal turned around to his charming side, and she made face which was willing. However, that much food probably had him done possibly not too much good, and so soon he turned back to his feast, which caused one of the participants to remark that this incident demonstrated abundantly which part of the marshal's body had the real power on him, inappropriate speeches under which the diaphragm of the marshal exploded into a massive orgiastic laughter in favor of those seducers, and thus he finally got part of their network.